wanted to show you how I would recommend you make dye. First thing is have a fairly clean counter. I even kind of move things out of the way, pull out my dish drainer, so that I've got nothing around that would eventually come into contact with food. You're gonna need jars. Wide mouth canning jars work great. If you want to invest extra, you can buy plastic lids, but the metal ones that come with them are fine for a while. Just eventually they can get corroded because of the acid in the vinegar will eat away slowly at the metal top. Other containers are glass, like peanut butter jars or wide mouth pasta jars. Talenti gelato jars work great. The only trick is you don't want to pour boiling water directly into those. So you'd want to find a different jar to initially put your boiling water into. I actually have an old dye that I need to rinse out first. It's okay to just dump this down my sink. I do like to run some water, and you can see this one has some precipitate maybe that was down at the bottom. So I'm going to rinse that out, and I'm going to give it a good scrub. Conversely, you can stick them in the dishwasher. You can see there's kind of some slime around the edges, so I like to remove that, especially if I'm going into a different dye. Probably could have worn gloves, but I don't usually wear gloves when I make my dyes. What you may want to consider though is a mask. The mask will help you just to make sure. What you don't want to do, whoops, forgot the lid. What you don't want to do is inhale these dyes when they're in powdered form. They are chemical dyes, they're not food dyes, so you don't want to be eating your eggs when you've made them, and you don't want to be inhaling them. So I've got just a kitchen or a hospital grade, whatever mask I can find these days. This one's on upside down because this actually has a nose piece. Just to try to get a little bit less chance of dye getting into my lungs. The dyes come in different packs. They're usually in a paper pack with then a plastic one inside. And I would recommend you don't open up the seal with the Ziploc part. I will take my knife, some pair of scissors, and I will cut where the fold was in this one, so that I can open that up without it having any chance of needing to go over that fold or over the Ziploc seal. And the very first thing I'm going to do is put my dye into the jar. I actually usually like to do this actually sitting in the sink, and then throw this away. So I've got my dye ready in the jar, and I'm going to add ideally distilled water, and I have some boiling on the stove, and I can hear it's boiling. So you want to add a total of 1 1/4 cups. One of the really nice things about the canning jars is that they have markings on them. And I'm going to start by just pouring like a 1/4 cup of boiling water in there. And then I'm going to stir it around. And I can use a spoon, but I can also just swirl it around. And what you're doing is dissolving any of the particles in the dye. I have done it before where I've poured the boiling water in. I don't know if you can see the steam, but I've poured the boiling water in, and then I put the packet in top, and the steam, the light powders of the dye particles just went up in the steam. And luckily I was outside on my deck, so it was okay. Another thing I've heard, and when the weather is nice, is it's not a bad thing to go do all the dye opening of the packets outside and add like just a tablespoon of water and make a little slurry outside, and then bring it inside to do the hot water part. I'm going to make an orange dye too. This is a different kind of packet, and again, this one obviously I'm going to cut. I wouldn't recommend tearing it, I would cut it. I'm going to remember to put my jar in the sink this time. And I'm going to cut and dump the powder into the jar. Again, this is going into the trash. And I'm gonna very carefully add about a quarter cup. I've got a little bit more, so I'm gonna just add the rest of it. And I'm gonna stir it around. So that's the worst part in terms of the dye powder and breathing in through a mask. The powder, the dye now is all in liquid form, and so I'm not as worried about it. One thing I will do is I will take a paper towel and I will kind of clean my sink. Oh, and you can see, even though I was fairly careful, I did get dye. I'll even kind of do all around the outside. I'll clean my scissors off. Make sure you're using scissors that aren't for food. And I'm just going to wipe all around the sink to make sure that I got up any little bits of dye. It's mostly that initial orange. It's kind of interesting. Sometimes you can see you're mixing red and there's like little spots of blue or little spots of green and you don't know where they came from, and it's basically all of these dyes are a mixture of different colored powders all put together. So I had a little bit of purple, a little bit of orange. I did a pretty good job. Then once they're dissolved, this is when I want to add the rest of the distilled water, or tap water if you can. The distilled water will keep the dye from potentially going funky, like growing mold. So I've got a mark here that's got my 10 ounces or 1 1/4 cups. So I'm going to pour right from my distilled water jar. And then I'm going to let them cool. Oh, one thing I like to do, you could do this with paper, or I like to use little sticker labels just because they're that much quicker. I put the date on it. Gotta think for a minute. March. And then I take a plastic spoon or an egg dipper, whatever I'm going to use later to dip my eggs, and I put a little bit of dye onto the jar lid, and that way I have a sense of what color this is. I could also do another label that I stick down on the front. And one of the things I'm going to do with this new, I'm going to put the lid on now. I have had a cat before, while the dyes were cooling, come and put her paws in, and there were little green footprints all over the counter. So I'm not going to take that chance. I'm going to close that up. But what I'm going to do, this was a brand new bottle for the orange, and I am going to, so I did my 1 1/4 cups. I'm actually going to cut the label right off of this packet and use the title on this packet. Hope you can't see my little trash pile here. Use the title of my packet and tape it on to my jar as a reminder of which dye this was. If you only have a few colors, you remember what they are, but I'm now up to over 40 colors, so you know I can see that this is an orange, but I may not know exactly which orange it is. And I will do the same thing on the lid, and that way if the lids and the bottles ever get open at the same time, I'll be able to get the right lid on the right jar. So this one's really hot. This one's kind of lukewarm now because I didn't have as much hot boiling water. So this one I actually could stick a egg in there fairly soon. This I definitely want to cool first. But before I stick it in there, I'm going to add a tablespoon of white vinegar and a pinch of setting powder or acetic acid. And both the vinegar and the acetic acid will add to the acidity of the egg, and it helps the dye set into the eggshell. And probably the last thing I'll do now, I need to wash my spoon, but I will go and do one more clean with a paper towel and make sure my counter is really clean, and then I can put things back together and make dinner. All right, enjoy making your dyes. Bye.